Wanted to start with a brief clip from my interview with your leader, with Sir Keir Starmer, from just over a month ago. Let's have a look.
What matters is clean power by 2030, keeping to those targets. I'm not prepared to move that date. So people keep saying to me, are you...
And if it costs 28 billion, you'll still spend
Are you moving back on your goal? No, we're not. Clean power by 2030. But look, let me... it's absolutely clear to me that the Tories are trying to sort of weaponise this issue, the 28 billion, etc. This is a fight I want to have.
He's running scared from that fight now, isn't he?
No, he's being candid, and there's still a huge level of ambition in Labour's plans that we've announced today. Of course, we've had to respond, as Keir has said there, to an underlying change in economic conditions.
That was a month ago. Nothing's changed in the last month.
I know,
he said the 28 billion... Conservatives are trying to weaponise. It's a fight I want to have. He is running scared from that fight.
No, he is making the case for public investment in not just our climate objectives, but how we will get the economic benefits from that. We've had to scale back some of the plans today, but really, this figure had come to dominate the argument rather than what it is about achieving. And specifically, look, when that pledge was first made, interest rates were 0.1%. They're over 5% today. I'm afraid that does have an impact on both your cost of borrowing and on servicing the existing levels of debt. And if you look, however, within those challenges about what Labour has put forward on industrial policy, on green steel, on making the investments through a national wealth fund in electric batteries for vehicles, in terms of GB energy, in terms of getting a jobs bonus so we get the jobs as well as the clean energy. This is the most ambitious agenda still of any party that's been in opposition that would come to power to deliver it, even on things like fuel poverty in warm homes, where we have had to scale back some of the level of ambition. So
interest rates have risen a lot since this was announced initially 2 years ago, but it doesn't change the question about why it's taken you to... They started rising 18 months ago. Why it's taken you so long to change this policy? I mentioned the difference in the last month. There's been no change in interest rates since that. On Monday, your leader was talking about this and recommitting to the 28 billion figure. What is going on behind the scenes? Who's in charge? And why wasn't this decision made more clearly, more loudly earlier on?
Well, the reason it's being made now is because we are in a position where we are preparing for an election and we're making sure every single one of the policies could go into a manifesto straight away. The deadline for that internally has been this week, and therefore we've had to make sure, because the Prime Minister could call an election at any point, that they reflect the economic conditions as they stand today. And of course, what we've also seen, as well as the cost of borrowing rise, is a kind of commitment from the government, a sort of scorched earth policy, spend as much money as they can, try and make it difficult for whoever were to win the next election around that. Now, that does have an impact. I wish it didn't. It would be easier if it didn't. But I think being candid now, rather than, being frank, we've seen some people win elections in the last few years making promises they were never going to be able to deliver. I mean, the 40 new hospitals, where are they? I think people, difficult as this can be sometimes, respect the fact that if you're candid now, you can deliver an ambitious agenda, but be clear about how you will actually get to the point where you'll be able to really meaningfully deliver on what you're saying.
So I do get that there's a trade-off, of course, between the economy and which policies you want to prioritise, and you can't do everything. But last year, in the middle of the year, when Rishi Sunak relaxed the government's net zero targets, Sir Keir Starmer talked about an irresponsibility towards the future. At COP in November, a few months later, he said the government was shrinking from its obligations. So I accept that there's a trade-off between the economy and policies, but do you therefore accept that there is equally an irresponsibility towards the future and the environment by prioritising the economy?
No, look, I say it's not a choice between the two. How much you can spend on anything.
But your leader made it a choice between the two when the government did something similar.
How much you spend on anything isn't determined by how much you want to spend money in that area. Whether you can do it, there's a whole range of constraints that you have to reflect around there. Specifically on what Rishi Sunak announced. First of all, it was a series of made-up policies, meat taxes and 7 bins that had never featured before in any discourse. But it was also things like changing the phase-out of petrol and diesel vehicles, removing certainty from the private sector, from industry, who are ready to deliver on that 2030 target. That's why we didn't go along with the government's agenda in those places. But it's, if you do this in the right way, there are major economic benefits from getting net zero right. It's not about necessarily how quickly you do it, but getting it right is going to be the big economic and job story. Already is, to be honest, but it's going to be the big story for decades to come. And that's why we're so ambitious in this area. But of course, we have to reflect some of the constraints.
But you're ambitious in this area the day after you've watered it down.
I am, because look at what we're promising. A doubling of investment still in tackling fuel poverty.
But less ambitious than you were.
Well, I think the targets... Look,
is it less ambitious than you were?
I think the level of ambition is still there, but how quickly you can go...
But at a lower level.
Has to reflect... It has to... If the cost of borrowing has gone up at the rate it has, we have to reflect that. I'd love it to be different, but we have to be honest and candid about the impact that has. I mean, look, if you look at... I think debt interest payments are forecast to hit £122 billion a year because of that. Now, that is money that otherwise would have been available for other things. It's about £55 billion a year more than it was when this policy was first announced, just that debt interest cost. That has to be met. It's just how it is. If you don't appreciate that trade-off, you end up like Liz Truss and you spend more money, but you spend it on higher costs because no one trusts you.
It does still come back to the timing of all of this because, in fact, the Bank of England's now held rates steady for, I think, 4 meetings in a row. So they haven't been going up in recent weeks or months. They went up a year or so ago. And again, on this timing, just last week, Rachel Reeves said, "I've heard time and again from businesses that what they want is stability." This was alongside a promise on corporate tax rates not going above 25%. You've made this U-turn a week after that pledge in front of a room full of business leaders that you will stick to your word and keep these promises. I mean, again, people are going to look at that one now and say, well, is this one on the chopping block for
I do
U-turn?
absolutely believe the stability business needs can only be met by a change of government. I think that's partly about the consistency of targets.
Is the 25% cap on corporate tax rate a promise that will be kept, or could it be U-turned on the 28 billion?
Of course it's a promise. We made that very
Why
clear.
is it different from the 28 billion?
Because if you look at the policies we've committed to, there's actually not a significant amount of change in that. What this is about is what would have...
Interest rates, what if they go up again? You've said you'd U-turn on this one because interest rates went up. If they go up again, could you U-turn on this?
Because we have confirmed what we believe can be delivered in the current economic conditions. Really, the figure itself, there hadn't been policies that contributed towards that spend in future. The figure was just out there as a level of ambition, which I understand we have some responsibility for and people have taken as a measure. But what we've committed to today is a set of policies that are exactly what business needs, what they want to work with. And look, there's no business in the country which themselves haven't had to react to that change in interest rates. I mean, a whole range, even in this area of net zero, the higher cost of borrowing, higher interest rates for things like offshore wind have hit that business model quite hard. So businesses themselves are dealing with the same issues. What they wouldn't believe is a political party or a government pretending that hadn't changed.
Is investment in this area still a net benefit for obviously for the environment, but for the economy as well?
Yes, I mean, it depends on what specifics you're talking about, but there is no doubt that this is the big opportunity of the future. That, for instance, decarbonising the electricity grid means you're going to spend far less on importing gas or paying for gas, even if it were to come from the North Sea. That, in terms of jobs and industry, these are the products and goods and services of the future people want. So if you're not making this transition, you're going to be making things without customers in the future.
So again, my final question on this then, it does look like you are principally still want to do this policy with the full level of ambition as previously, but have been led by the polls or the politics and watered it down, even though you believe it's good for the environment and good for the economy?
No, I think ambition in this area is good for climate and good for the economy. That doesn't mean you don't have to reflect, not the polls, not the attacks from the opposition, but you have to reflect what you can do. You've got to be clear with people how you can deliver it. I think people, despite the fact that even if they didn't like the parts of this announcement that are different, they should respect the fact that a political party in this position, being candid with people, is more important than trying to somehow present the situation as being different to what it is. There's still a really ambitious agenda there, and of course, that, we believe, will have long-term benefits for the economy, and that lets you do more, not less, in future.